Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here with Gab with Your Gad with Eric. I'm Amy Raven on staff at MAR. We're super excited to have you here with us. As always, Eric has some great content to share, and he is busy with the content changing on a daily basis. The narrative changes on a, what is it, hourly basis, Eric? It feels like probably.
Pretty much.
We are thankful to have you here. A few housekeeping items. You will be muted, but this is absolutely interactive. Eric is here to answer any and all questions. So in the chat box, pop your question in there and we'll get it answered. And Eric takes many breaks throughout his content and can answer any questions you may have. So thanks for being here. A quick shout out to remind you, credit hours are due June 30th, but I think the request is actually to get them in today just due to processing timelines. Also a second shout out for our new agent academy that starts in July. If you've got any new colleagues or partners in your brokerage, or even just friends or colleagues, let them know. It's a great program put out for those new to the industry and how to set up your business and to succeed. So really great feedback on that program. So I wanted to let you know about that. And I'm going to turn it over to Eric. So thanks again for being here, everybody.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, my name is Eric Myers, Government Affairs Director for Minneapolis Area Realtors. We've been doing this for several weeks now, so I'm sure there's some slides where the information isn't new, but there are some that are new. So if you notice a speed change throughout, it's likely because the content has existed for many of the several weeks, and now we kind of anticipate that you know some pieces. But then they'll be focused on other sections and new information as well. Again, Eric Myers, bachelor's degree, political science, University of Minnesota, and I've been actively lobbying for 20 years. There's more stuff there, but I will digress. My role during the pandemic really changed, and so I'm really much more dedicated to following all three levels of government. And that would be the local levels with the city councils, the mayors, and the council members, but the state level with the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate, and then executive orders from the governor's office, and then the federal level with Congress, but then also monitoring agency guidance as well, HUD, IRS, Treasury, and others. And then just monitoring different aspects with regards to the protests and the violence and the curfews, and the government's response to the aftermath of the George Floyd death, and just information there that's useful and helpful to know, and what the situation is there. But no prognosticating one way or the other on which direction the community should or shouldn't go, but just kind of a what is version of what's happening in terms of some of the government response. There are resources for you to access. NAR has a long list of resources and guidance, and the link is there. The Minnesota Association of Realtors has a coronavirus FAQ page, and MAR has its COVID-19 resources page. And just as Amy said, those regulations are changing so often that I think even if you've been on this call for several weeks, I would encourage people to go back and click through these links and look for the new things and use it as an opportunity. I know the folks on this call and the people that access this call and the materials afterwards are really tuned into what's going on at all three levels. But take a look, go through some of those resources, and just kind of be aware of them, because there are a lot of changes, and it just helps to be aware of them. Minnesota stay-at-home orders. We'll talk about another piece of that with the foreclosure and eviction suspensions, some of the stay safe guidance, and we saw some curfews and some highway closures and other items throughout this time. So some of the stay safe updates from the governors: there is testing available. Anyone with symptoms is encouraged to get a test, and locations can be found at the address on the link on your screen. Stay at home for safety. And then there is some concern regarding people facing domestic abuse or violence during this time, and they want you to know that there are resources available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's a 1-800 number here, and then a text number as well. Minnesota Unemployment Support and a link to deed. There's a 13-week, the CARES Act includes a 13-week extension of unemployment benefits. So that takes Minnesota's 26 weeks out to 39 weeks. And there's an additional $600 federal boost, but we'll actually talk about that, how that might be changing here on a couple slides into the future. And then mental health, if you're worried about yourself or a loved one or anyone in your sphere, there are mental health resources. The state has a website and resources and links. Click through here. Just know that you and the folks that you're encountering are not alone in the challenges of these times. So, but there is information and resources here. I know realtors, the reason some of this stuff is mentioned is because realtors really are on the front lines with consumers, and who you interact with today is not who you're going to be, who you interact with tomorrow, and then people in your own family. And just, so we're just trying to give you a wealth of and a breadth of this information so that you know that the resources are there and where to get them, so that they've kind of been combined and pulled for you here. Minnesota stays safe. There's some child care information here, emergency housing, emergency food support, and then wearing a mask in public. Some information about that. A lot of reopening activity in the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure you're all aware of them as they start to impact your personal lives. Gyms are starting to come back online, indoor social gatherings, indoor restaurants at certain capacities, outdoor restaurants at certain capacities, personal services, barbershops, salons, with taking reservations and certain capacity limits too, and then places of worship with capacity limits as well. It kind of continued reopening information here. I got a notification that the YMCA's in the Twin Cities, I'll go back one, will start opening on June 16th. So you had other private gyms opening, on the June 10th timeframe, but now you've got a more public, obviously you still have to have membership for most of these, but YMCA taking a little bit longer, but looks like they're starting to come back slowly and instituting policies and distancing and of course the whole thing, but they're coming back June 16th. Some workers will be strongly encouraged to wear masks, that kind of thing. Seated outdoor recreational entertainment and meeting venues, personal care services, a lot of information there, different capacities. This one is new. The peacetime emergency was scheduled to end last Friday, and the governor called a special session, and immediately after calling a special session, issued Executive Order 2075. The 20 is the last number of the year, and he's actually at this point now executed 75 executive orders since being governor. And this executive order 2075, and you can click on this as a hyperlink, it'll take you right to the order itself, but it extends the peacetime emergency. And why that's important is because in Executive Order 2014, there was a suspension of evictions and writs of recovery during the peacetime emergency. So this order says that you can't evict anyone and you can't begin the foreclosure process on anyone during the peacetime emergency. And with the peacetime emergency having potentially expired last Friday, then this extension, this new 30-day extension takes us out to July 13th. So there are no evictions and no foreclosure activity between now and July 13th. So only after July 13th. Of course, this is subject to this order being rescinded. The legislature could vote to end it, but they have not done so yet. There's been an attempt in the Minnesota Senate. The Minnesota House will not go along with it, so because they're in the same party as the governor. So I don't expect this to end any sooner than it would of the July 13th date. Let's see here. There's been some information about different sports and youth sports. If you go to the Minnesota Stay Safe website, they're actually categorizing different types of sports as low risk medium risk, and high risk of the transmission of COVID. And obviously you can just see with the different types of sports where there's more physical person-to-person contact, you're going to have a higher risk. When there's a little less person-to-person contact, you're going to have a medium risk. And when there's almost no person-to-person contact, you're going to have a very low risk. But these ratings and how they've been classifying it have impacted youth sports and adult recreational sports statewide. And just know that they're kind of looking at it through these three lenses. The dashboard here, you can link to this dashboard. So just type in your browser, Minnesota COVID-19 dashboard. This is a snapshot from a few weeks ago, a couple weeks ago now, but it takes you to this page. It tells you about the deaths and the confirmed cases. You can read some of the demographics, what the state safe plan says, and how to, and that dashboard about where things are in terms of opening. And then there's a county count as well. Minnesota Stay Safe chart. At the end of this, there's a link, but you can kind of see the phases of the reopening. So beginning June 1st was phase 2, and then June 10th was phase 3, and thereafter, with some of the things to come in the next week or so, you're going to have some dates for phase 4. And you can click through this link. You can talk about what the social setting is and what the application is, and then you can come across on the chart and look to see what's open now, what hadn't been opened in the past by category. So, and this list goes on, and here's the link to that list. So if you have any questions, how come my community pool isn't open yet, but it seems, it seems like they're allowed to, all sorts of questions that you may have category by category could potentially be answered from accessing information in this chart. Some stay safe iconography for you. Wash your hands, get tested when you're sick, stay 6 feet away from others, wear a mask if possible in public. Understand that in the city of Minneapolis, wearing a mask in public is required of those that can medically tolerate it, above 2 years old. And that is an ordinance and a law that must be followed in Minneapolis. And then stay home when you're able. I didn't make this chart, but I guess they have 2 number 5s here. I noticed that. Stay home and work from home. Maybe they're saying those are the two, one and the same. So the Minneapolis Association of Realtors did put a message out, a very heartfelt message. We take the killing of George Floyd very seriously. It has very negative impacts for the family and impacts on our community overall. And we condemn these actions by the police officers that perpetrated them. And we'll work together towards a more just and safe community for everyone. And I just want to say that MAR has been a leader on this, and there's going to be more messaging in a website that's forthcoming to help all you, the members of the Realtors and our extended Realtor family, take some actions and help make our community a better place. So there's going to be some opportunities. We're going to be applying for some grants at the association from NAR, try to get some funds back in the community, try to do some positive things, and move on from there. Was there a question from that?
No, I don't think so. It looked like Jerry was having a few audio problems. I was just double checking with him. But no, everything looks great.
Yep. I'll probably pull this slide down next week, but there was some curfew implications, and anytime there's when there is a curfew established, obviously you guys get that information in the news, but what's not always reported in the news is what the actual verbiage and the language of the orders say. So I'm dedicated to continuing to bring you updated orders from the city. So when the city makes changes and there's new directives, we'll bring those forward. But this probably, since these were specific days at the end of May, this slide probably won't remain next week. There was a Minneapolis Star-Tribune did maintain a list of buildings that were hard hit and physically damaged and or burned or impacted from some of the violence that occurred after George Floyd's death. And since this is primarily a real estate update, we have that link for you here. So you could click on this link and it'll take you to a laundry list of businesses that have been impacted, some of which aren't coming back, some of which are dedicated to rebuilding. So click through to that, follow those businesses, be aware of those businesses. If they're inside of your spheres, check in with those owners, see if there's anything you can do to help. In terms of the COVID-19 response and just questions about forbearance and questions about foreclosure potentially, NAR did put out a guide, Protect Your Investment, a guide for at-risk homeowners. So this is a guide for realtors to use when they're talking to consumers that might be experiencing job loss or an impact to their income that's putting their home in jeopardy. And so it's a beginning guide. It's a 4-page guide. You can download this from this link, as a PDF. You can add your business's iconography, your contact information, but this, and so it'll be branded to you, but this information is a start of a conversation. It's a customizable brochure, a start of a conversation between you and the consumer about what they can do to protect their investment and to hopefully stay in their home, exercise the forbearance, get in and out of a forbearance, hopefully get back to work at some point and be back to paying on time. So, but this guide helps you have those conversations with the consumer. At one point in May here, FHA had there was some rumors going around that if you entered forbearance that you weren't ever going to be allowed to refi again. If you entered forbearance, you would not be able to be eligible for a new home purchase mortgage in the future. And FHA came back out and said, no, that's not the case. 30 days after ending a forbearance and after 3 consecutive payments, 90 days after the end of a forbearance and after 3 consecutive payments, FHA will treat the forbearances as if it never happened. So it should have no negative impact on your ability to refinance or get a new home purchase mortgage eligibility. Unemployment, there is some unemployment update information here. As you know, we talked about it being extended for 13 weeks. That takes Minnesota's 26 weeks out to 39 weeks. The CARES Act did apply a $600 federal boost to your, so if you're receiving unemployment income right now, you're receiving an additional $600 on top of it. So your full amount is actually $600 greater than your actual state amount. But here's an interesting thing to be aware of. The $600 federal boost is set to expire in late July. The U.S. House has passed the HEROES Act and has extended it through January 2021, but the Senate has not yet acted. So without further legislation from Congress, the $600 federal boost will expire in late July. So at some point, these payments will be, unemployment payments will be $600 less if Congress doesn't act. Now, Senate is expected to act at some point, but they have not done so yet. For the first time ever in the history of the country, unemployment does apply to 1099 workers. That's called the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, and information on unemployment or PUA can be found at either of these 2 links. So IRS has been getting back to work, and about over 11,000 IRS employees have been called back to IRS call centers and work centers in 3 states, and it should be even more as time goes on. And there is some guidance that if anyone receives stimulus payments and it's been deposited into trust because the person's now passed, on how to return those funds, and there's questions about repayments. So just some information there. But if you're waiting on any other IRS business and these employees have started to come back to work and return and resuming normal operations, you should start to see answers before where maybe you have seen a few weeks there of kind of radio silence from the IRS if you were waiting for something. So what is the picture of late mortgage payments in the Twin Cities? This graph was in actually MinPost, Star Tribune, and their source is Black Knight, which does some market research for mortgages across the country, mortgage-related businesses, and you can see Minneapolis has a 2.17% late mortgage payment rate right now, but it is still among the lowest. So it's kind of, there are obviously other cities and states here in large metro areas that have some lower numbers than us, but there's also a significant number of communities that have higher numbers than us. 7.2% in Miami, 6.2% in Las Vegas. Obviously, Las Vegas being really impacted during the last housing crisis in the 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011 timeframe. But you can see the numbers in some of these communities nationwide. You see where Minneapolis is, and then you can see some numbers below us as well. Monthly unemployment rate for February through April. You can see how Minnesota is actually trending on the same trend line, but below the U.S. average. Some of these I find in the news, Indeed and other sources, and I throw them in here, but some of them might be a little bit of a duplicate from what you would receive on a Thursday call with David Arbit. Unemployment rates, February through April, and you can see how we're doing compared to our 5-state, cohort. And you see Minnesota in purple here, February, March, and April, and you can see a huge impact to Wisconsin unemployment rates and some of our neighboring states in the cohort. And you can see Minnesota doing a little bit better each time. Unemployment rate by county in Minnesota, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and you can see some very deep purple areas in northwestern Minnesota, some moderate purple areas in northeastern Minnesota, but by and large, just kind of this 5 to 10 ratio in the counties throughout the state. Pandemic unemployment assistance, 1099 workers have been funded. Many realtors have applied for unemployment and have been receiving it. Just an important thing, you got to go back in every week and request it again. And if you receive a commission in the week prior, then you have to report those dollars. And if your commission check is larger than your PUA benefit, then obviously you're not going to get pandemic unemployment assistance that week. So just make sure you go in, make sure you answer the questions honestly, do the best you can, follow the prompts on screen, and just tell the truth and be honest and forthright. And that doesn't mean the very next week when you had nothing this week in terms of income that you're not eligible again. It just from week to week, be accurate and truthful with the numbers. So skip past that one as well. So Congress did enact the Paycheck Protection Program, and many those loans have gone out, the first round and second round, and PPP was a brand new invention. EIDL existed prior to the pandemic. They've got very similar uses. EIDL, you apply directly through the Small Business Administration. PPP, you do it through your local lender. I'm going to skip through some of this initial guidance. We do have some information about how many loans so far through the second round in some of the states surrounding us, and you can kind of see 92,000 loans, just almost 93,000 loans for roughly $11 billion for Minnesota. And you can see Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois on top of us, and you can see Wisconsin and Indiana trailing behind. So nationwide, the SBA has approved more than 4.5 million PPP loans for a combined $511 billion. That's huge. PPP forgiveness guidance is available here. This click through here, you'll get to an 11-page guidance doc that'll walk you through PPP forgiveness, but understand that this form may change very soon. And the reason is Congressman Dean Phillips from Minnesota helped pass some legislation in the U.S. House that made a number of substantial changes to the PPP loan program. It dispenses with the 75% rule for FTEs, keeping 75% of FTEs on payroll. It eliminates restrictions on loan terms to 2 years, brings that out to 5 years, and then ensured that PPP loans also have access to the payroll tax deferment programs, and then pushed the deadline for rehiring out to December 31st. Also, the expenses were originally only for an 8-week period, and this legislation pushes it out for a 24-week period. This was a bipartisan piece of legislation that Dean Phillips was able to get past the U.S. House, and then the Senate was like, no, we're not going to take the House bill, and ultimately the Senate did take the House bill, and it was, and that's what was passed. So, NAR supported this change. There's a letter to say so. And just so you know, new guidance from Small Business Administration will be coming out. And there's been some talk about making that 11-page guidance on forgiveness smaller. Other CARES Act provisions, there's no federally backed student loan payments for 6 months, no interest and no penalties. And you may be able to access some of your retirement funds if you need to build a business budget for yourself or a personal budget for yourself during this time. Please check with your plan administrator and your tax professional. The $300 charitable deduction is back for 2020 taxes, even if you're a non-itemizer. And then all employee pension credit, the delay of employee payroll taxes, but then all the deadlines at IRS have been extended as well. The tax deadline to July 15th. 1031 exchange deadline to July 15th, and the tax opportunity zones extended to July 15th. Minnesota legislature special session continues right now. There was a large undone list. They just started last week. The emergency powers were extended. Here's the budget swing, and this is something that they want to, one of the items that they want to work on during the special session is addressing the budget shortfall. And so you've had changes, negative changes with parentheses dollar amounts here, $1.6 billion change in individual income tax, $1.3 billion change in general sales tax and other categories as well, for a total of $3.6 billion negative. So you take the $1.5 billion budgetary balance that you had, you subtract a $3.6 billion deficit. Estimated spending for COVID had, prior to the legislature taking up special session, had increased by $391 million. And the stadium reserve, which is subject to the market some, because it's a reserve, had suffered $63 million in losses as well. So this math brings you to a $2.4 billion state budget deficit. But they have a $2.3 billion reserve. But to use this reserve, they actually need the legislature to act. The legislature has to pass law and appropriate the funds. Otherwise, the funds sit in this account and the deficit continues. As you all know, Minnesota has a required, constitutionally required balanced budget amendment, but they don't have to do so in 2020. They can wait till 2021. But they would have to act before June 30th of 2021. Minneapolis mayor has an emergency order on face masks. We mentioned that earlier in this presentation. Anyone over 2 that is medically able to tolerate a face covering shall be required to cover their nose and mouth with a mask or cloth face covering in accordance with CDC guidance when in indoor spaces of public accommodation. You go into what the definition of a public accommodation is here, what masks are covered. Again, if you're over 2 and you're medically able to tolerate a face covering, it's the law that you have to wear a mask in Minneapolis. So it's not an option. It's a law in Minneapolis, and there you can be subject to violation and regulation, issuance of warning letters, administrative citations, the businesses can be, their license could be in jeopardy, or misdemeanor prosecution. So there are penalties. The city of Minneapolis has had a lawsuit, Minnesota Human Rights Act lawsuit filed against it, one that the mayor and the city council actually welcomed. The lawsuit will assess disparities in the protected classes, and the lawsuit scrutiny is supported by the Minneapolis Council, and the legislature is also considering a number of policing reforms as well. One idea is to end, and this isn't an end-all be-all, it's just one idea, is to end the residency requirement ban for officers. So right now, there's a ban that says you don't have to live in the city of Minneapolis to be a Minneapolis cop, police officer. And so one idea would be to remove the ban so that you would have to be a resident. That's just one piece. There's more that's happened with this lawsuit as well. Chokeholds have been ended. It makes the other officers on this scene mandatory reporters. They have to report the incident, and they have to attempt to intervene and get the person that's using the illegal chokehold to stop. They need to physically ask them to stop. They need to verbally ask them to stop, and they have to report the incident up the chain of command to their superiors. Only the chief and the deputy chief can authorize the use of force for crowd controls against protesters and demonstrators. And so there's been a number of changes that have occurred just because this lawsuit was filed. There was 5 or 6 changes that I kind of, from what I just covered, that were instituted immediately as this lawsuit was filed as well. So when you see in the paper that there's discussions about defunding the police, and then you read the stories deeper and you ask yourself, what are the real policies being discussed here? Just know that there are some areas, this lawsuit is one of them, that brought 5 or 6 changes immediately to the city council and to the Minneapolis Police Department. It's definitely not it's definitely a start. It's not the end all be all. There will be more reforms coming. Just a couple issues for realtors to be aware of. New renters protection ordinance did start June 1st. If you're a landlord in Minneapolis and you have more than 15 units, you now must be following the city's new renter protection ordinance, which started June 1st. If you are a landlord in Minneapolis and you have less than 15 units, you are encouraged to begin following the city's new renter protection ordinance, but you're not required to be in compliance with it until December 1st. Eric, what's in the renters protection ordinance? It's 3 big buckets. 1, criminal screenings, and there's look back periods for misdemeanors, felonies, and serious felonies. Serious felonies is a handful of actual crimes, and the look back period is 10 years. Regular felonies, the look back period is 7 years, and misdemeanors, the look back period is 3 years. And then on the credit side, landlords can no longer use a credit score benchmark number to determine whether someone can get in or out of housing. So you can use information from the credit report if someone has an unlawful detainer or a previous eviction. That's usable information, but no more, oh, we require a 620 and all you have is a 610. You can't use just a number and a baseline. And then also there are new limits on security deposits. And those are all that information and more. If you click through this link, will take you to the city's renter protection, our updates on the city's renter protection ordinance. On a separate issue, Minneapolis has enlisted a vendor to study the issue of TOPA. TOPA is Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It's based on a Washington, D.C. model that was enacted in 1980 and amended in 2017. Buildings sold where a tenant exists require the seller to attempt to sell it to the tenants first. The tenants have to form a tenants association. They have to file as an LLC, and then they would have to choose condo or co-op, and then they'd have to get financing and attempt to purchase the property. If those things don't happen, then the building owner could sell them to the original seller that they had. you'd have to offer all the same prices and terms and everything else. You couldn't try to sell it to an individual for one price and to the tenants for another. They'd have to match. There's a lot more information in that. Our realtors have been involved. We got 5 members involved in the study and got them connected with the city and dropped into focus groups. And they are putting their final report to the city together starting today. And they hope to have the vendor hopes to have that final report back to the city on TOPA recommendations by mid-July. The realtors in the focus group signed a 5-person signature letter. After having listened to and being involved in the focus group, they are expressing some of their concerns about Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And that letter was submitted this morning at about 9 a.m. directly to the vendor. And the vendor, because it's a formal letter, will submit that as an addendum to the final report that's going to the city for mid-July. If you have questions about TOPA, there are updates, a primer, and talking points on MAR's webpage. Just go to advocacy, local issues, and it's the second set of issues. There's talking points, a full primer, what is TOPA, on and on and on. You can learn more about this issue. Evolving and emerging issues, there is definitely a need for systemic change in Minneapolis. We need to close some housing gaps in Minnesota. Minnesota has had traditionally some of the highest home ownership rates in the country. We've always been number 1, 2, or 3 in terms of home ownership rates, topping out prior to the last housing recession at well over 74% home ownership. But it's really suffered in the intervening years because of the crisis. And it's not shared evenly amongst different groups of people in Minnesota. So there are housing gaps. People of color own homes at a 43 to 46% rate. That compares to the 74% rate overall. So you're looking at a 30% gap for people of color. And each different ethnic group has different home ownership rates as well, but none as high as the overall statewide average. So that's why gaps do exist, and hopefully there will be efforts to help close those gaps. MAR's working with a number of organizations that are doing just that. There continues to be discussions about a second round of stimulus. The Senate has said they were looking at July for that, and every week that goes by that nothing happens on a second round of stimulus, direct payments to Americans, just your guess is as good as mine. We're looking for more federal guidance on the foreclosure and evictions point. Of course, that involves federally chartered banks and private contracts, and then more state guidance on foreclosures and evictions, and there continues to be increased local pressure to act. Of course, the peacetime emergency was extended in Minnesota, and so that has impacts here. And then we talk about the intersection of policy programs, the Paycheck Protection Program, the Emergency Disaster Recovery Loan Program, PUA, how they all work together. Can you take, if I take some of this and I take some of that, how does all these programs work together? What did the changing regulations for compliance look like on the back end? So we continue to try to analyze those, come up with the answers for that information and get it all back to you. And then there's been some calls for increased pay for frontline workers during the COVID crisis. And that includes both your medical frontline folks and your, store shop, people in stores, truckers, people stocking shelves. So there's been some calls to try to get some increased pay for those individuals as well. I think just going back to in terms of evolving issues, what's going to happen with the future of the Minneapolis police force? There's been calls for defunding the police or disinvesting in the police. But the big question is if you do that, then what does the new entity or emerging entity look like? So far, I've looked through all the council members' emails to their constituents, and even within the group of folks that say, yes, the 9 or so that would like to disinvest in the police, there's a lot of ideas about what would work and what wouldn't. So even within those 9 city council members that say, yes, let's disinvest in the police, the what to do once that's taken down, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of strata in terms of the ideas among those 9 folks. Most of them agree that this is going to be part of a broader 1 year or more community discussion about how to move from the state of policing we have in Minneapolis right now and other areas and to what's coming next. So I don't think anyone, even the politicians themselves sitting here right now, have any or all of the answers. And I think time will tell on some of those issues. So with that, what I did today was I didn't take as many breaks as normal. I was hoping to get you off the call sooner rather than later. We covered a lot of information there. I'm always here for you. If you have questions, please email me. Contact me by phone at any time. I do want to go back and say thank you to our hosts, our sponsors. I can't go back to the beginning. Let's see here. I'll do the old-fashioned way. Go all the way to the front. So I'd like to thank our sponsors, Bell Bank and Mortgage, North Star MLS, Royal Credit Union, and Supra. And without their support, we couldn't bring this level of high quality content to you on a weekly basis. So with that, Amy, are there any questions?
I think you've answered everybody's along the way. Well, let's see, maybe one just popped up. Oh, Jerry is saying thank you. So,
oh, great.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat box, and Eric is here. Otherwise, as he said, feel free to email him or call him.
And take these slides from the association's news deck, and we provide them to you. Bring them back to your office meetings. Maybe if there's a slide or something that you think would be important for your office to know, or pick out a couple pieces and make sure you can be the resource back in your office about and getting this information out to our wider audience. So we're really trying to gather this information and make it powerful and actionable for you, and so you can be the expert back in your office too and bring this information forward. And for that, I thank everybody. So
excellent. Thanks everybody for being here. Another reminder, David, as Eric had mentioned, has his webinar on Thursday. Feel free to join him then. And then we hope to see you again back next Monday with Eric. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a good day.